All right. In this video, we'll talk about the four special days of the year, which are the two solstices and the two equinoxes, and what that can look like for observers on the Earth, right? What the sun and sky looks like for observers on those days. So, let's start out on the left side here, when Earth is, say, on the left side of this orbit. Um, we call this June 21st. This day is known as June 21st because the northern hemisphere is pointing towards the sun and the southern hemisphere is pointing away from the sun. Specifically, though, what constitutes June 21st is the fact that the sunlight coming from the sun is striking this latitude line, this white line here in the northern hemisphere, known as the Tropic of Cancer. Right? Cancer is a constellation that's part of the zodiac, and the zodiac we'll learn about in another video coming up. So, what this means for observers on that latitude line on Earth, well, if they're standing on the Earth, whoops, I need the pen. Let's go. There's a tiny human there. And if it's 12 o'clock noon for observers at the latitude of the Tropic of Cancer, they look up at their zenith and they see the sun staring right back down at them. That's special for observers at that latitude line because this is the furthest north on the Earth, the furthest north that the sun will be overhead for any observer, right? Or really at all. You don't have to look at the sun for it to be overhead, right? So anyone on this latitude line of the Tropic of Cancer, which, by the way, is of plus 23.5 degrees north on Earth, the sun will pass directly overhead. Okay? That's June 21st. That's the summer solstice for observers in the northern hemisphere, and it's the winter solstice for observers in the southern hemisphere. But that gets a little into the seasons, and we'll talk about seasons in another video also. Um, the better term is the June solstice because it's June whether you live in the northern or the southern hemisphere, right? So June is better in that case. Let's move along to September. September 21st, September 22nd, thereabouts. For observers now on the equator of Earth, I know you can't see it because Earth is literally blocking it, but if an observer, I'll put it in red so we can see, we're standing on the equator on that red dot, but it was the daytime, so they were on the other side of Earth shown. The sun would be at their zenith at 12 noon. The sun would be directly overhead. Right? So what's happened to the latitude on Earth for which the sun's overhead? Well, in June it was up here in the north. Now 3 months later, it's decreased down to 0 at the equator. So let's see what happens 3 months later on the right side of this image on December 21st, which for observers in the northern hemisphere is wintertime. Well, let's draw a little human standing at the Tropic of what's called Capricorn in the southern hemisphere. If they're standing at the Tropic of Capricorn at 12 noon, they see the sun directly overhead. Okay? At midnight, they'd look over here, but we're worried about the daytime. So now that latitude is minus 23.5 degrees. It's down here now, right? It's minus 23.5 or 23.5 south. Either way is fine. But the important part is that now the sun is overhead for observers at this southernmost latitude. So it's gone past 0, it's gone past the equator and continued south now. Okay? And so now, as we go from December to January, February, and now March over here on the top side, if you will, we have an observer, oh boy, let's try and draw this, standing like that, looking towards the sun. They're standing on the equator of the Earth once again, and the sun is directly overhead. Right? So the sun now is right there on the equator. So what's it done? It's moved back up in the latitude to 0. And if we continue on back to June where we started, it's now back up to the northernmost point. So over on this picture, we have the map of the Earth with the 2 tropics and the equator. So from June to June, the sun is directly overhead for observers, at the tropic, and then the sun's zenith position moves south until it hits, the Tropic of Capricorn, and then after that it moves back up, passes the equator once again, and hits the Tropic of Cancer again. And guess what? After June, it continues on again. It moves further south, further south. Okay? So this is a great lead-in to the seasons, but again, that's another video. But this is what the sun does year after year after year, right? Season after season. Observers have the sun at their zenith, and it just goes back and forth between these tropics, back and forth, right? All right. You can ignore the Arctic Circle for right now. I'll talk about that in another video as well. But these are the 4 special days of the year, and these are how the tropics are defined. All right. I should note that the word solstice, like in June and December, can loosely be translated as the furthest point, or the maximum, right? The maximum of Sol, the sun, in other words. So the June solstice is the furthest north that the sun will be overhead. December 21st is the furthest south that the sun will be overhead. And the equinoxes means that the sun is shining equally on both the northern and southern hemispheres. In other words, everyone on Earth gets equal amounts of day and night. All right? So these are the 4 special days of the year. Thanks for watching.